I'm really excited. Now, we've been on quite a journey through this formal training for the assessment cluster so far, but we're about to change gears in a massive way. Up until now, it's been theory, a lot of theory. We've been talking about things like principles of assessment and rules of evidence, assessment methods, collecting evidence, contextualization. We're about to put all of that into practical application. So we've had a lot of theory so far in this training for this assessment cluster, but from here we change gear. Not so much theory, we've covered that. Now we're going to show you in practice how we use all this information in a registered training organisation environment. So to do that, let's just recap one very important thing that we've learned. And one of those things we learned earlier on related to the principles of evidence. And one of the principles of evidence is validity. We have to make sure that we're assessing what we're supposed to be assessing. Okay? We assess what we're supposed to assess. We need to assess the right things as stipulated in the competency standard. So when we're collecting that evidence and comparing it to that benchmark, that we're making sound judgment decisions. And that's important. So what I'm going to do now is lead you through the process of what we do at RTOs to ensure the validity of assessment, to make sure that we're setting that benchmark and that we're collecting evidence relevant to the standard. Now, so let's get started by looking at a unit of competency, and for the sake of no other better option, let's look at BSB ITU 203. And we're currently at the training.gov.au website, and we're going to do a search for this unit. So let's do a quick search for this nationally recognised training with that unit code. Hit the magic search button. It's given us two here. It's given us a superseded unit, which was the previous unit, and that unit has been superseded by this current one. So BSB ITU 203 is the current unit. So let's click on that one and it will bring up the information about that unit of competency. In fact, what it's done is it's given us the details here. Here's the unit code and the unit title, Communicate Electronically. It's the first release. And as we scroll down the page, you'll come to a spot here where you can download the documents. And you can download them in Microsoft Word format or in PDF format. Okay, Word's good if you want to cut and paste. There's my tip for the day. So if you're going to be cutting and pasting anything out of the unit of competency, download the Word version. Usually that's a little bit more user-friendly. Alternatively, you can go with the PDF version if you like. All the information that is posted here also appears down the page. So you can scroll down the page and actually see the information, or you can download it and have a look at the downloaded document. In this case here, I'll just scroll down the page and make it simple. Let me firstly point out that with the unit of competency, it's actually broken up into two types of documents. One is the unit of competency and then the assessment requirements. So together, they tell us about the benchmark standard of how we're going to be assessing and what we need to be assessing against. The unit of competency includes the basic information. It's got the elements and the performance criteria, and the assessment requirements, the focus in that area is on the performance evidence and the performance knowledge and the assessment conditions. We'll be talking about all these things in turn as we move through it. Of course, another important part is the foundation skills, and that also appears within this unit of competency information. So, this video is really important, so let me recap what we've done so far. We've searched for this unit of competency, BSB ITU 203. It's called Communicate Electronically. We scroll down the page here and we can see we can download the two documents, the unit of competency, which gives us the elements, the performance criteria, the foundation skills, and the assessment requirements, which helps us to assess. So it's very relevant to what we're doing in this cluster. The assessment requirements includes the performance evidence, the performance knowledge, and the assessment conditions. You can see that this is all related to assessment. Okay, we can download those two documents either in Microsoft Word or in PDF formats. Or we can just scroll down the page and look at them. Just having a quick look, we've got the modification history. It tells us that this is the first release and this has ever been updated. An application statement, which is a brief statement about the unit of competency. The unit sector, which tells us where this unit of competency lives. Then we've got the elements and performance criteria. This unit is broken up into 3 elements. There's usually between about 4 and 6. Implement procedures to send and receive electronic mail, manage electronic mail, and collaborate online. Those are the 3 parts of the unit of competency. Those are the 3 elements. What we need to do when we're collecting evidence is we need to collect evidence to satisfy all 3 of these elements. If we satisfy all 3 of these elements through the assessments we conduct and the evidence we collect, then we can sign off on this person having completed the unit of competency. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but it's not good enough. You want all of them together in order to verify competency if you want to issue a statement of attainment for this unit of competency, or if you want to issue a qualification if this unit is part of a qualification. Within each of these elements, they're numbered 1, 2, and 3. Within each of them, the other performance criteria, they're always numbered in this format as well. So for element 1, we've got 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. For element number 2, how many performance criteria do we have? 5. So they go from 2.1 to 2.5. And for element 3, we have 3 performance criteria, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. This is a standard format for a unit of competency. These performance criteria tell us the specific criteria of performance. Woo! Yeah, okay. What does that mean? It means it's the criteria that have to be performed by the candidate in order to verify their competency. So if you want to sign off on somebody's competency for element number 1, you collect evidence about 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4. And again, if you don't collect evidence about all 4 of them, then there's something missing, there's a gap, and you can't conclude that the candidate has successfully completed this element. So in order to obtain a statement of attainment for this unit, you've got to collect evidence about all 4 of these performance criteria. They all need to be satisfied. All 5 of these performance criteria and all 3 of these performance criteria. 4, 5, 3, add them together, that's 12. You need to collect evidence of all 12 of these performance criteria in order to be able to say, yes, the candidate has successfully completed all 3 of these elements. Yes, they're eligible for a statement of attainment. Below that, you've got the foundation skills, which is all about, as the name implies, the foundation skills, the skills that underlie the candidate's abilities. In this case here, we've got reading, writing, oral communication, which are 3 of the ACSF core skills. You'll learn about that in TAE LLN 411, one of the other units you're doing as part of the Learning Design Cluster. And here are some of the employability skills that are related to this unit as well. These foundation skills do need to be explicitly mapped in order to be confident that they're being covered in order for you to sign off on a candidate having successfully completed the unit of competency. Below that, we've got the unit mapping information and links, and then we've got the assessment requirements. And the assessment requirements falls into 3 sections: the performance evidence, the knowledge evidence, and the assessment conditions. The performance evidence is the evidence you collect about their performance. Another word for performance is skills. So it's all about skills. In this case here, the evidence is about knowledge, the knowledge evidence, things they know up there. And the assessment conditions are often more generic information about how the assessments need to be undertaken. Very important information. There are things in here that will be critical to how you organise your assessments. So you need to consider the performance evidence, the performance knowledge, and the assessment conditions. Underneath that, again, there's a link to the links. Now, so at the end of the day, if we're going to be assessing this unit of competency, BSB ITU 203, we need to check in with the unit of competency. We need to look at the elements. We need to look at the performance criteria. We have to decide how each of these is going to be assessed. We also have to make sure that our assessments and the evidence we collect are going to satisfy this performance evidence, the knowledge evidence, and the assessment conditions. Everything is critical, and we also need to, of course, not to forget the foundation skills that underlie the candidate's capabilities. So we need to make sure that we are going to assess all of these components effectively. How are we going to do that? Well, we'll close this off and let's have a look at a template, because there's a template that you can use for this purpose. Now, there's lots of different templates in RTO world. Different registered training organisations use different templates. This is one that Mr. Wed recommends because it's very, very simple. You put the candidate's name here if it's going to be mapped for a specific student. Usually that's not the case, but the unit of competency certainly needs to be there in terms of the unit code and the unit title. Then you need to specify the elements. Element 1, you type it here. Element 2, you type it here. Element 3, type it here, or cut and paste, whatever's easiest for you. Then document all the performance criteria, 1.1 onwards, 2.1 onwards, and 3.1 onwards. We don't have a fourth element, so when we're mapping this unit of competency, we don't have to consider that one. But we put in all the elements and all the performance criteria into these sections. Where do we get that information? Well, let's dive back and have a look again. We get it by copying, by cutting and pasting from this area here. Okay, so we take that information and we move it across into our mapping document. Okay, and we copy it here. Then we also take the foundation skills. Now, foundation skills can be recorded as being relevant to certain performance criteria, and there can be descriptions as well. If we dive back into the unit of competency, you will see that. So here's the foundation skills, here's the performance criteria it references, and here's the descriptions. Again, take that information and copy it into the template. Right there and right there. We'll deal with these other columns in a moment. Then there's the detailed performance evidence, which we can list here, and the performance knowledge, the knowledge evidence rather, that we can list here. So we grab that performance evidence and the knowledge evidence. Okay, and we can copy and paste it from here into the mapping. Now, sometimes we can take a little bit of a shortcut. Instead of listing all the performance evidence, you might think this is P1, P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, P for performance. You might identify these as being knowledge evidence number 1, which is K1, K2, K3. You could list those abbreviations for each of the dot points into the template rather than writing the whole information. Your call as to what works best for you. And then we've got the assessment conditions, and with the assessment conditions, again, you just copy from the unit of competency. So you take all this information from the unit of competency and the assessment requirements, and you put it into this template, this mapping document. Then what you do is you ask yourself, in order to collect the evidence that we need, how are we going to do it? Which assessment methods are we going to use? And conveniently, we've got one column for each of the 5 assessment methods. We've already studied this. We've already talked about this in this cluster so far. We've got direct observation, portfolio, product-based, questioning, which is Q&A, and third-party evidence. You look at each element, you look at the performance criteria, and you ask yourself, which of these methods are we going to use? Okay, and you put a tick or a cross in the columns that you are going to use. Don't tick everything, don't put X's everywhere, because some of the elements and some of the performance criteria won't lead themselves to being assessed in certain ways. Others, however, they will lead themselves to you thinking, you know what, I want to ask questions about that. That's how I get the knowledge information that I need. Or I might want to collect a variety of evidence. Let's use a portfolio. So you put X's and you put ticks in against the performance criteria, and you'll start to see patterns emerge as to what assessment methods are effective. Similarly, you do the same thing with the foundation skills. You ask yourself, in order to satisfy this description and these performance criteria, will I use direct observation, portfolio, product-based, questioning, or third-party methods? And again, put X's or ticks in the relevant boxes. Performance evidence, same thing. knowledge evidence, same approach. It's a little bit different with assessment conditions, because you write the assessment conditions here and you talk about how they're being achieved here. And you might say something like the third-party report does this or relies upon this in order to meet that assessment condition. There's some final checks at the end. Does the assessment plan cover the entire unit of competency? Hopefully yes, or else you've got a validity problem from the technical principle. Do the assessment instruments meet the required workplace candidate needs? Yes or no. Is the suggested contextualisation appropriate? You might have found ways to contextualise this unit. You tick yes or no here as appropriate. And in the space below, record any recommendations for improvement as to how you're going to improve the instruments or any general notes that you want to remember. You get all that information together and you are going to have a winning mapping exercise. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, but it's really, really important. And this is the first tangible step to creating an assessment plan and creating a whole assessment strategy that is going to tie everything together and assess everything that's in this unit of competency. It's a creative process. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer as to where you put the ticks and where you put the crosses, but there is a logical flow that will make sense and which will be a good solution as opposed to a poor choice. One thing I will recommend is when it comes to each of the elements, make sure that at least 2 of the assessment methods are being used for each element. Okay, not necessarily each performance criteria, but with each element you want to be having at items in at least 2 of these columns. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting the variety of evidence in order to make effective assessment decisions. All right, that's assessment mapping. You might find it useful to watch this video a second time. Otherwise, when you're ready, move on to the next screen. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your company.